Oh, thank you so much, Pete. Welcome, everyone, to Great IO Get Together number 2, a cult of persona, lity, how HBO failed us. My name is Richard. This is my co-host, Tara. Tara, how you doing?
Not too bad. I learned a new word today. You
Oh,
ready?
mm-hmm.
Trifurcate.
Oh,
Do you
that's
want to guess what it means?
it's one more than bifurcate. So I'd assume.
Well, yeah, exactly. It just never occurred to me that you could trifurcate something.
Can you quadfurcate?
I think so.
Quin
I don't know.
hex? I don't know. Yeah, it's okay.
Don't know. Anyway, my goal is to use it in every sentence I can find.
Oh,
So if you
nice.
can help me out with that, that would be great.
I see. I don't know if there will be any trifurcation opportunity today. We have kind of a weird show. Unlike our last time, this week we will be watching live the docudrama. I'm calling it a docudrama. I don't know if they call it a docudrama, but I'm calling it one. The docudrama Persona, which is a HBO docu thing about personality testing. It's gotten a lot of really negative reactions from the IO community, so we thought it would be a good idea to watch it all together. It's going to be a little bit different structurally, though. If you're watching on YouTube Live right now, we're going to actually have to dip into the Discord because, as it turns out, YouTube, Google, not super happy about live broadcasting entire TV shows. So,
That's a shock.
isn't it? So, we're going to have to swap over to Discord in just a second, which is just fine. The link, if you're not on the Discord already, is now visible, almost overlapping Tara's head. So sorry for that. If you have not joined the Discord yet, please do so now. This particular stream will actually stay open because after the screening is over, we're going to come back here. We're going to record about 30 minutes worth of discussion based on whatever we talk about in the Discord, as well as kind of our own ideas based on what happens in the show. It looks interesting. In setting this up, I've watched the first like 2-3 minutes, and I will say never has there been a more exciting Likert type scale. Never. So we're gonna do that. If you want to join us, come over into the Discord, and what you're gonna want to do is click in the voice channels on the Watch Party group. That's where it will be broadcast. And then as soon as we get started, you will see a little live button appear next to my name, and you'll be able to watch the live broadcast in Discord with me. I'm also going to be turning on my webcam so that you can get some live reaction shots. Again, I've only seen 2 minutes. This will be a pretty fresh viewing. Tara, I don't think you've seen any of it, have you?
Not at all, and I'm going to keep an open mind. So no
Mhm.
skepticism here.
All right.
Just kidding.
I mean, it is the most excited discussion of personality testing that I have ever witnessed. Even in that first 2 minutes, I think it's going to be great. So yeah, if you're not in Discord already, follow the link. It's that way. Follow the link and join the community. Join the Watch Party group. And also join the on-air text channel because otherwise you won't be able to speak. The voice channel is only for talking. So join in the on-air channel to chat with everybody and watch the watch party once we get going. So I will click over now. See you there. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining the post-game discussion. Just had a rousing hour and a half of Persona in the Discord. Lots of folks chatting about that. So we've got about half an hour we want to spend just kind of debriefing. Is this a debriefing? I guess it's a debriefing.
Analysis.
Analysis. Yes.
Armchair analysis.
Yeah. It was a very interesting. It was very interesting as a documentary. It really falls in that clear category of like sensationalistic, clearly agenda driven kind of thing, which isn't necessarily bad. But in doing so, it mixes some good points with a lot of not very clear points. So maybe we start on the good, like what.
Yeah, well, you're right that all documentaries have a point of view. And this one in particular is based on a book. So it's not even that the filmmakers came into it with a particular
Mhm.
agenda so much as they saw a story that could be told. And so I think we want to come at it from that perspective. But you're like you said, they got a lot of things right. one thing that's maybe a difficult pill to swallow for IO psychologists is that a lot of what we do is grounded in a capitalistic and individualistic way of seeing the world.
Hmm.
And they're right about that, right? That we are trying to differentiate between people. I think that the idea that we could potentially select for teams is totally fascinating. And I know that you said, well, isn't that a Marxist utopia? It doesn't need to go quite that far, right? It doesn't have to be full on communism to think about how you might select teams of people that have complementary strengths.
Mm.
And so that's a fun thing to think about, and maybe a useful response to people who are so upset about this idea of an upper class and an underclass.
Yeah, man, the the conversation I would want to have about that is societally, where is the correct balance point, in a sense, like this kind of view that, like, I mean, that's the reason that I describe it that way, because the way that they present it makes it sound as if they're like, the only option here is to eliminate the value of individuals, which is not a realistic response. And I think it is more, I think it is correct to say it in this sort of blended view, that there are surely healthier balance points perhaps than the one we have now. And figuring out what those balance points exactly are, I think it's a very interesting question that was raised here.
Yeah, I would love to find a way to work together with people who have legitimate concerns about fairness and justice,
Hmm.
and for whatever reason, see IO psychologists as the enemy in the pursuit of justice, because any IO psychologist that I talk to would certainly not describe themselves that way, right? I mean, we know that personality tests actually solve some of the very problems that the interview subjects were complaining about. So I just want to know how we have a productive conversation. And I agree with you totally that there is a middle ground, there's a compromise. Like reasonableness can win the day here. And so, how do we do that?
I don't know.
What? You
It's
don't
nice
know.
to yeah. Yeah, that's a wonderful question to lob at me right now. So no.
What do we do, Richard?
So yeah, I mean, so the conflating of all these different ideas is a really important dimension of this problem. That when we're talking about, like, there's an awful lot assumed that the solution to some of these problems is in fact to approach is to take more classic approaches that this are, the science is very much, our science is very much about directly addressing, like the assumption that the most fair way to assess somebody is an interview. I don't know where it comes from. It's just this weird cultural value that seems almost worldwide. Actually, I don't. I seem to remember reading a study on that at some point. I think there are a few cultures where interviews are not the normal way of doing things. It's definitely true in the U.S. though. Like if you don't do an interview, it seems strange. Like it seems like you're doing something wrong. So that something like an unstructured interview, which has such enormous potential for bias and just poor decision making in general. I mean, not only from a fairness perspective, but just bad for the company. To go to assume that that kind of thing is preferable to personality testing, like as you said, like that's the reason we have tests like that. We have tried to develop ways to be more fair and more equitable, and they're not certainly not perfect. They can certainly be misused. You can certainly create tests that are horrible, but that's the reason the science exists. That's why we have recommendations. That's what the degree is for. That's the whole point.
But I just don't think, I mean, you don't get anywhere by saying like we have the science, you're a fool, right?
Yeah.
And meeting people where they are is the way to change hearts and minds, if you will. So I think your point about an interview is a great one. Like, who does better in interviews? Well, extroverts, right? People who are low neuroticism, they're not stressed out by the interview context. And so if you frame it in that way, we say, well, actually, the interview is amplifying some of the things that you're most concerned about. And we all share the concern that you shouldn't be able to smooth talk your way through the selection system, right? So turns out the interview could potentially be introducing the very things you care about. I don't know if that would work. I mean, I think that's a good place to start, maybe.
Well, so who are we convincing? Because we got that, I mean, legitimately depressing story that ended with a walk into, I think, a Kentucky Congress or some legislature somewhere, telling sob stories and legitimately horrible stories. But like, is that who we're convincing? Are we going to congressional bodies and being like, look how terrible things will be if you don't listen to us? Or is there some other strategy? I mean,
Yeah, good question.
yeah, historically,
Well,
PSYOP has not been great at this.
oh, but on the other hand, I mean, PSYOP is recently put a lot
Yes.
of energy into advocacy,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think they're making some real headway. Um, but that's one level of approach. I mean, also individual people who you meet are targets for persuasion
Mm,
or conversation.
mm-hmm.
And sometimes those are the most productive conversations, right? You're not trying to change the world, you're trying to change one person's mind. And I also think that we're speaking to other IO psychologists who might hear this kind of message and think like, "Oh no, am I a corporate toady? Like this is
Mm,
terrible news. Like
mm-hmm.
if I want to be on the side of truth and justice, I need to leave the field of IO." Like we don't want people
Mm.
to think that. And so part of the message is talking about what we really do as IO psychologists to our own community.
So it's a really interesting idea. Is there an opportunity to I don't want to say grow to increase the breadth of interest and maybe the diversity of the field in general as a result of perhaps widening the message that we throw out there. I mean, IO doesn't have a strong brand really, except
Right.
in the communities that already know they need IO. They're like, oh yeah, those are the people that know what they're talking about. But anybody else has no clue. And when you think, I think of often like what is an undergraduate's exposure to IO psychology, and I would imagine that if they're exposed at all in most undergraduate classrooms, it's like, oh, there's the corporate side of psych, uh,
Yep.
and that's not a great image. So I mean, is there opportunity in this? I mean, in some ways, this is almost a resurgence of personality psych, or not personality psych, personnel psych on the I side. Is there an opportunity there to increase the kind of perspectives that we're bringing in, and maybe even make the field more attractive to the very people we're talking about that would be interested in this kind of thing?
Sure. I think a lot of IO psychology researchers tend to be a bit inwardly focused.
Hmm.
They're speaking to other IO psychologists. There's no rule against collaborating with sociologists. The people who were being interviewed in that documentary, there was a law scholar, sociologist, a data scientist. Right? Why don't we work harder on speaking to those audiences and collaborating
Hmm.
with people who do have a legitimate claim to knowledge. Like that documentary is a little bit unfortunate in that it was incredibly opinion driven, but it's not to say that people in those fields don't have something really valuable to contribute to this problem that we're all interested in, right? Which is fairness and justice. So
Hmm.
um, I think we can. I mean, I don't want to say we like the royal we, but you do see a little bit of arrogance like, well, come on, we know everything about testing and personality and no one else may claim knowledge about that field. That's not really very productive.
I mean, I'm a big fan of interdisciplinarity, as you may know. The
Really?
the it's an interesting problem because the major way that you that the primary avenue that you get at changing people's opinions is when they think that they have something essentially to gain by interacting with you. So I come at this by saying, well, IO can grow. We can be better by integrating some of these perspectives, and bringing in, trying to come up with the best thing altogether, and rather than just saying, well, here we have the good testing part, we're going to bring our testing to you. I would, obviously say that trying to redevelop what we understand along with other fields simultaneously is what will get us to the right point. Do those other fields have similar kind of motivation though? Like, I often think, especially in the data science machine learning community, like, is there, if they knew about IO, would we be attractive collaborators? Would they want to grow with us, or are we more of a hindrance, or would we seem like more of a hindrance to the kind of things they're trying to accomplish?
Now, do you mean a hindrance because we're always insisting on, more psychometric rigor and following laws and whatnot, or a hindrance because we have a narrow way of looking at the world?
Maybe both. The IOs are professional, personnel buzzkills in a lot of ways, and that's okay. Um, I guess I more. Man, there's a lot of dimensions to that. So there's the legal side, one, and I don't think I think that there is currently a research literature in AI machine learning on how to do personnel selection legally using algorithms. Like that's a thing. It sort of kind of cites what we do, not real extensively. And I just wonder, would they see our contribution to the conversation about legal, just focusing there for a second, as even helpful? Because their view is very much, well, the rules are the rules. Let's figure out how we can kind of get around them in a way that's legal, because that will get us the best prediction out of our models. Like, what do we add to
Mhm.
that if that's the goal?
Yeah, well, I suppose the ambition that we should have is to not be so useless. I know that sounds like a cheap answer, right? But if we really are just these people that say, well, construct validity, construct validity, construct validity, then sure, that's not very um, intellectually interesting for people to collaborate with. But I also want to point out this is not a problem that's unique to selection. Like
Mm,
job search as a phenomenon, for example, is something that lots of people are interested in. Economists care about job search. Sociologists care about job search. Um, Computer scientists care a lot about job search in the context of matching people with opportunities. So um, my point here is that looking at selection only is not as productive as considering, I guess, like recruitment and selection together, or
mm,
workforce development and selection together. Maybe that's the other way to go. Like I think most of the people I know that do selection just do selection,
yeah.
right? But the way to solve the problem is not usually with a better test. The way to solve the problem is by expanding and supporting the pool of potential workers, right? So instead of saying like you have a good personality, you don't, asking as a society, how do we build up everybody's capabilities so that they can all compete for jobs that they want to do?
It's it's even broader. I mean, it's even broader than that. I like the framing of org development because this potentially is now coming up in almost every dimension of these kind of more data sciencey selection matching kind of methods come up in like ad hoc team formation. There's now software that you can use to say who are all the right experts from this organization to join in this high profile project. Like it's this
Right.
this idea of selection is much broader than hiring now. The idea of just using tests and using assessment, however you define it, in order to figure out where people go in organizations and what they're doing and what they're doing while they're there, like that is becoming a really like that's becoming a big area. We and trying to contribute to that broader conversation. Yeah, maybe.
So do you think that the selection haters would be comfortable with what you're describing, where it's really about placement and not selection, not you have a job and you don't, but you're best suited for this particular task within an organization? Because there are organizations that do that, right? They focus more on placement than selection.
Yeah,
So would
this
that documentary have the same tone if it was really about like who got to work in the most interesting department of the grocery store?
So this is, I mean, that's where we get into our Marxist utopia. Only if rewards are equal in all paths. So if there are differential rewards for different types of jobs, then suddenly you've undercut your whole equality message. Uh,
Yep. Yep.
any tie to attempt either actually measured merit or attempts to measure merit or attempts to measure potential, all of those mean that you are trying to sort people into better and worse situations. Like if it didn't matter where people were, then it could be a random number generator. There would be no reason to do anything like that. Or if it was need based, which is one of the suggestions in the documentary, you could just identify, well, where are the greatest rewards? Who's the people that need those rewards the most for whatever reason on whatever criteria, and just put them there. Like there would be no need for any of this. So it's all tied up in the idea that we, for better or worse, socially in society, need to sort between people's potential or capabilities or something. I don't think that framing it purely to placement alone would solve the underlying problem.
No, I guess I agree with you. But what you just said gave me another idea for how we can collaborate with people who are interested in justice, which is
Mm,
talking about our very well developed justice literature, right? And what you just said is
mm,
that fairness doesn't mean that you get whatever you want, right? There are different rules for fairness. Equality is one rule, everyone gets the same. Need is another rule, you give to who needs it the most. And equity is the rule that we tend to emphasize in our capitalistic society. People with the most merit get the most rewards.
mm.
And a lot of what I hear in that documentary is people rejecting the idea of an equity-based system at all. But it doesn't mean that their definition of fairness wins the day. It means that this is a word that has multiple meanings. And there's an opportunity to communicate, right? Because we can sort of get away from these fuzzy words that are getting people into so much trouble. And there's so much
Hmm.
emotion. I think the thing that struck me about the most, this documentary, is there's so much emotion that people have built up about this sense of unfairness. And we know that, a sense of lack of justice is an incredibly powerful emotion. And if we can get the emotion out of the discussion, we could just move forward more productively.
Hmm. Well, we have a question in the chat.
Ooh.
Any thoughts on the job seeker trainer that advised them to take personality assessments as if they were asked the question in an interview? Ooh, thoughts?
Yeah, that's actually pretty good advice. And that's what, I mean, why not? It is something that people are probably doing intuitively
Mm,
anyway. Um, I didn't hear anything in that the coach said, like, you should lie, right? It was really put your best foot forward. And as far as flagging the social desirability item, that's a really interesting one. Because he didn't come right out and say, uh, don't say yes to this item. He just said it might be a trick question.
yeah.
So I'm not really sure what to think about that, but I just at first blush, I don't have a serious problem with it. I think that's the kind of thing that, um, if we care about like classist issues, for example, that's the kind of thing where, if your parents are well educated and you're a middle class kid, like you have that information already just by virtue of living your life. And
Mhm.
so evening the playing field by giving that information to everyone is actually a good thing.
Mm. Yeah. It's, I try to think about how that advice works also with that item. Because you wouldn't, if somebody said, like, have you told a lie in the last 5 years in an interview? I think it'd be pretty difficult for most people to just lie to the face of an interviewer and say, no, I have not told any lies in 5 years. so,
Yeah.
so
Didn't you write a paper about this?
uh, about lying?
About faking?
Sure.
Somebody did. I thought it was you.
I mean, faking's a thing. I'm pretty sure I've
About
written about
coaching. No, no,
faking.
no, about
Oh,
coaching specifically.
coaching. I hope not because I don't remember if I did. Uh, I don't know. I don't think I did. It's very
Let me see
possible.
if I can find it. Just continue on with the conversation.
uh, it's yeah, for viewers, this is a very real risk when you have too many papers to distinguish between the ones you've already written, and that's not a very high number, by the way. That started happening to me at like 8. I'm like, I think I wrote about that. I'm not sure. So, so anyway, so earlier we were talking about the concept of conflating. So one of the things that I think we will run into and have already run into a lot of difficulties with is that many of these concepts are very fuzzy. And part of the reason that persona can get away with conflating the Myers Briggs and personality testing in general and the big five and everything else together is because the average person doesn't really know the difference between those things. Whereas we as experts have a lot easier time saying, oh, well, here's a well defined line between this test and this general category of things. We come in with the benefit of a lot of training about exactly that problem. And you even saw it extended in this further. I mean, it covered AI and algorithms and facial recognition, and all of that was sort of mushed together with personality testing. And I mean, all of that was for the broader goal of scaring people. This is very much a documentary about scaring people. But it's also a very real problem. So anytime that we try to get in these policy discussions or we try to have those conversations with random people, like they're not going to differentiate between those things any more than the documentary really did. Is there any good solution to that? Like I don't want to still be the professional buzzkill of like, let me educate you about personality testing. Like that's not the right approach. What is though?
No, and I don't think we even could if we wanted to because we're not
Mm,
credible as impartial in this conversation. I think
mm,
it sort of comes across, my suspicion is that it comes across like a vacuum cleaner salesman who shows up and says like, "Oh, you don't want that Hoover vacuum cleaner. You want the fancy expensive vacuum cleaner." It's like a totally different class of object. And the average person is going to say, "I don't care enough about vacuum cleaners to engage with you on this level of like why one's better than the other.
Hmm.
Of course, that would be a mistake because vacuum cleaners obviously do differ in quality, and I have my beloved vacuum cleaner. Anyway, the point is that it's not about like lack of education. It's a lack of motivation to engage at that level,
Hmm.
because it doesn't matter to them as much as it matters to us.
Hmm.
Um, so, getting over ourselves in that way might be a good place to start. Like we come across as trying to sell a personality test, even though the big five is not something we're trying to necessarily sell to anybody.
Yeah. And I will go on the record, by the way, saying Meal is the best vacuum cleaner brand.
Obviously,
Obviously.
this is not a matter of opinion.
There's no secret payroll here. We're not on the budget of Big Meal, the payroll.
No,
It's very clearly superior and you should use it.
obviously.
I'm just saying, yeah, I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I know they might criticize me for, judging the personality of vacuum cleaners and differentiating individual differences, and that might be playing into a non-equal society, but I'm going on the record. It's definitely Meal.
And isn't that a German company? Just
Yes,
saying.
it is. I think. Oh no, if it's like Austrian, I'm gonna feel. I don't know what. Actually, don't know where it's from. Somewhere in
I don't
Europe
know
though.
either.
It's
It is a
definitely
fine
European.
machine, though. I'm a big fan.
Anyway, uh, yeah. So I already forgot what we were talking about. So, uh,
I think some documentary that we just watched.
yeah, something like that. I mean, adequately. I still I'm still dissatisfied with the solution here. Like this is gonna get worse. Like this is like I describe this as an opening salvo. Like this is the first that we're going to see in a broad range of attacks on testing, and maybe even onto like I don't know. I feel like science in the workplace itself may not be a very positive thing moving forward. Like right now, we already have, at least in the United States, a pretty generic anti-science sentiment, kind of below the surface. This may be making it much more explicit, especially as AI purveyors increasingly do things that are pretty scary and may in fact be really quite unfair and problematic, and that we're going to get swept right up in all of that because people are just not going to care about the differences.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that the people that we heard from, I would not call them representative of the kind of person I usually think of as anti-science,
Hmm.
right? So there's like this other anti-scientific movement that doesn't go along with like the climate change deniers that I usually think about when I think of anti-science. And so this isn't really a political issue. It's something much more kind of social and human, but. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that anti-testing and sort of anti-mechanical decision making, right? Even though they wouldn't call it that, anti-algorithm of any sort, that nobody ever really liked algorithms, but now that they're mysterious and non-transparent and part of AI, they really, really don't like algorithms.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It Well, there's a broader. I was just actually writing a paper on this. The idea that a common strategy when talking about AI is personification, that or almost humanization, to pretend that an AI is somehow a conscious thinking thing. It makes it easier to vilify. When you're saying AIs are making decisions, when you're
yeah.
saying that algorithms are choosing whether you get a job, it becomes a lot easier to say, aha, they are evil, because it's much easier to say an entity that can make decisions and think and feel is evil than it is to say, oh, well, this model that someone made is evil. And that kind of rhetoric is becoming just everywhere. I mean, even in the AI papers, they talk about it that way now, where you have computer scientists who definitely know better saying the AI decided to take advantage of this information. Like, no, that is not what it did.
Well, sure, but I mean, anthropomorphizing things is not a new concept. Like we've always
Yeah.
done that. I mean, we've assigned, Clippy a personality 20 years ago. He's not a very sophisticated AI. I just gendered him. I just said he, but you aren't going to question me on that. He's clearly a he, right? I mean, this is not
Kind of
a new
overbearing.
problem. It's
Yeah.
just that uh, I think a broader range of people are talking about it and thinking about it, and it's like you said, it's reached these policy discussions, and that's where it becomes really serious because you start making laws based on people's emotions, and that's not a great idea.
Hmm. It Clippy is a different context though, because you have an avatar and it's been engineered to have a personality. AIs are not engineered to have personalities. Like Clippy is supposed to seem friendly and helpful. they didn't necessarily succeed at that, but it was at least something they were going for. But nobody set out to say, oh, my random forest model that predicts whether you get a job is approachable. Like that's not transparency is kind of a weird dimension of that, but that's not a goal in the actual creation of the technologies. I don't know.
But don't you think individual users are perfectly happy to sort of give them personalities and sort of form bonds with them and trust them or not trust them and say like, oh, she's cranky today, or something like that?
Without I don't know. So I think an interesting context for that would be Uber drivers and managed work. Do I mean do crowdsourced, I forget what is even the word, ride sharing, there we go, ride sharing independent contractors, do they attribute personality to the algorithm, like it's kind of it's cranky some days? I don't know.
They might say that it's unfair though, and mean like a
Yeah.
sort of intentionality behind the unfairness as opposed to just the outcome.
Oh.
So, right, they can say like, "Oh, this
Hmm.
thing is against me. It's punishing me because I did a thing." Like, I mean, I think it could make all kinds of
Yeah.
very human attributions about it. Maybe not personality specifically, but certainly like motivation.
It's still, oh, motivation's interesting. It's almost like a procedural justice kind of dimension, like trying to figure out what is the reasoning, even though there's not really reasoning, trying to think through what that reasoning was and then attribute blame and fault associated
Yeah.
with it. Yeah. Hmm. We
Mhm.
have more comments. One, there's a vacuum cleaner museum in St. James, Missouri, and we should
What?
go. Yeah, I guess that's road trip gig number 45 will
That
be
seems
to
not that far from us, actually.
Uh, suggestion: we should start marketing our assessments as not featured in persona. Not a bad idea. A question: do we have evidence that non-IOs even watched or cared about this documentary? That is a great question. I think it's
I wondered
concerning.
that too.
I think it's concerning, but also some of the inciting incidents are not necessarily current. Parentheses 2014. What was
I
2014?
think the book was written in 2014.
Ah, okay.
So it's a good question. I don't know how many people watched that documentary, and I also don't super care because the people who were interviewed do have public platforms.
Yeah.
So whether they're connected to this particular documentary or not, like these are arguments that have made it into the mainstream public consciousness, and they are
Mm-hmm.
things that people think who have a lot of influence. So we should care about that, if nothing else.
Hmm. Yeah, I know that there was in general a huge IO outcry at this, and I've seen it pop up on like every random IO that I follows, not everyone, but a lot of them, LinkedIn and Twitter and some Facebook posts, and it's been everywhere. But we definitely care about this a lot more than others do.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a direct attack on what we value.
Is it?
Uh, I
Is it
think
though?
so.
I
I
mean,
think so.
it's a direct attack on the MBTI, and it becomes this sort of weird glancing blow on everything else. Uh,
I
I,
mean, Kathy O'Neill crying about how this personality test ruined someone's life
mm,
had nothing to do with the MBTI and all about
that's
just
true.
the very concept of using personality testing for hiring.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Hmm. Well, on that happy note, we've been talking a while. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up here?
no, this was certainly an experience and I'm glad that we did it.
So there we go. Wise thoughts. This was an experience. There we go.
This was certainly a thing that happened.
This was a thing that happened. Thank you all to viewers for joining us on this thing that happened. In the comments in the Discord were certainly very engaging. We hope you'll join us for our for next show. In the meantime, stay strong out there. Don't let these things get you down. We're good people, really. All right, that's all. Thank you all, and see you at next gig.
Oh, the times were hard and the wages low. Lever, Johnny, lever. I guess it's time for us to go. And it's time for us to leave her. Lever, Johnny, lever. Oh, lever, Johnny, lever. For the voyage is done and the winds don't blow, and it's time for us
I can't believe it's already over. Can you? To keep the excitement going, check out our website at thegig.online. Join our Discord community to chat with your hosts and your fellow giggers. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you never miss a gig. Above all, thank you for joining us.